Are you building AI automation workflows using n8n and ever felt like testing those workflows takes forever, constantly retriggering the webhooks, waiting for API responses, or dealing with the real-time data limitations? Well, if the answer to this frustration is yes, then welcome to my course on AI automation powered by n8n. In today's lesson, we are going to eliminate this frustration. You are going to learn about pinning the data, editing the data output which is there, so that you can speed up the development process of these AI automation workflows. This will allow you to test, iterate over, and debug your workflows in a much faster manner. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to freeze data, tweak outputs, and work with test cases without relying on any external live calls, saving you hours in building these workflows. So we will start with the concept of what is pinning data in n8n. Well, pinning data logs the output of the data that is produced by any node, so you don't have to re-execute it while building your workflows. If you are working with data which is available in external systems, then you can rely on this feature so that you don't have to make those calls again and again on those external systems. That would save you time as well as resources. And it is especially useful if those external systems have some kind of limitations applied to it, either in the form of API calls that you are making or data you are processing. Pinning the data in the n8n node itself would save you money as well as those usage limits applied by that external system. And how so? Because you can fetch and pin the test data in your n8n environment, solve or test all the use cases that you want to test in your workflow, and then once you have built confidence into it, you can unpin the data and have the real-time data integration in place. So now you understand the basic. Let's go to the screen share and understand how this concept works in n8n. Alright, I'm logged into the cloud instance of my n8n workspace, and we built this workflow of connecting different apps in a past lesson of this course. So what I'm going to do is, in this lesson we are relying on this webhook that is going to submit data, and then the rest of the workflow executes. Now the biggest challenge of executing or testing this workflow is to get this webhook data again and again. So what we can do is we can leverage the feature of pinning data, and once we have received single data in it, I'm going to pin that data in this workflow, and then we can use that data for rest of the steps which are there in the workflow. So how do you do that? So for that, I'm going to open this webhook and click on listen for test event. So now this is listening for test event. I don't want that while building this workflow. I want to execute this step again and again, submit the form again and again. So I'm going to submit this form only once. So let's go ahead and do that. So my webhook is tied to this new user sign up Google form, and I've already detailed out how you can integrate Google Forms with n8n. If you have not watched that video, go and check out my previous lessons of section 2, and then maybe you can come back and test this out. Otherwise, if you have a working integration with some sort of a form or a webhook, you can follow along with that workflow as well. So over here we have to mention the first name. I'm going to mention the first name, last name, email, let's use this, and then company name is GenAI, role, let's say developer. Now let's submit this. So as we have submitted the form, let's go back to our n8n workspace, and you can see that node has been executed successfully. And here is the data that we just submitted right now. If I go back to the canvas, you can see that one item has been outputted from the webhook node, and then I can continue building rest of the workflow. However, if I have to do some sort of a change in one of these steps and want to test out with some other kind of data, then how do I do that? I have to make this webhook node in listen mode and then again submit a new form. So in order to avoid that, what we can do is, if I open up this webhook, you would see an icon over here that says pin data. So node will always output current data instead of executing it. It does not apply to production environments. We will talk about some of the limitations that exist with this pinning data kind of concept, but for now I'm going to click on it and it is going to pin the data. And as soon as I clicked on it, you see that at the top there is this message that is coming that this data is pinned. You can click this unpinned data. It is going to unpin the data. But for now, let's pin this data and let's go back and see how the configuration of the node has changed. And you can now visualize that there is this purple colored pin icon over here that denotes that the data that you are getting out of this webhook node has been pinned. So now this data is available for rest of the workflow, and we can do as many test runs as we want for rest of the workflow building steps without submitting that Google form data again. So now if I execute this, it is going to basically use the data that was there. So this was the pin data, and you can see that true branch has been outputted because it is checking for body.email is not empty. And here you can see that the Google form that we submitted had an email ID mentioned. So this has returned us true branch. Now if I go back over here, let's save this and let's go back like n8n course, and let me refresh this as well. Now if I come back and reopen this workflow over here, it was lesson 5, connecting different apps. You would see that webhook is still having this pin data. If I click on it, it is still maintaining the state of this pin data. So that means anytime I have to keep on working this workflow, I don't need to submit a fresh set of data again. It is going to use the data that we have already pinned with it. And this is not just useful in case of this webhook kind of mechanism. In some of the cases, for example, you are making some sort of an API call. You remember in the lesson where we talked about the HTTP node, we made a call to AccuWeather APIs. And if you look at this account, if I log in over here, so this was my account where we logged in, and I'm using the free account, and this particular API has a limit of, like you can see, 50 calls per day. So I can only make 50 calls. If I'm building a workflow that is using one of the APIs from AccuWeather.com, then at least in the testing environment, I don't need to pay $25 a month, right? I can pin the data that is coming so that the API limits of this 50 calls per day is not being breached. Once I'm satisfied that the entire workflow has been built with those pin data requests which were there that were not exhausting my quota per day for this particular API, I can keep on saving money till the day I want that workflow to be production ready or live in production environment. So that is basically the advantage of pinning data. Now let's also look at some of the key limitations or key factors that you must consider while using this feature of pinning data. Number 1 being, pin data can only be used for test runs, not for live execution. Number 2 being, you can only pin data for the nodes that have single output. Number 3 being, you can only pin data once per node. If you are going to pin the data again for a particular node, that is going to replace the already pinned data that was there. Number 4 is, you cannot pin data for a node that is producing a binary output. Point number 5, I have already shown it to you that you can clearly identify nodes that have pin data as they all have that blue purple icon of pin associated to them. And finally, I also showed you that once you save your workflow and exit out and you come back again, pinning data will continue to exist so that tomorrow or day after tomorrow you want to work on your workflow, the pin data still remains over there and you don't need to call that external service or submit the webhook again in order to start afresh. So with this great feature of pinning data in n8n, you work faster, avoid making unnecessary API calls, and streamline your testing of AI automation workflows. So what does this editing output feature allows you to do? Well, it lets you manually modify the output of a particular node so that you can simulate different test cases. It helps you test workflows against missing data, incorrect formats, or edge cases without making those live API calls again. And why you don't want to make those API calls again? We have already answered that when we were talking about the pinning data concept. Now let's get to the screen share and see this edit output feature in action. So in the cloud instance of my n8n workspace, I have opened up a past lesson workflow that we had built. So in this workflow, what we are doing in on click of it, we are fetching the feedback of customers from Google Sheet. We are also getting the customers data from an Airtable, and then we are merging both these things together. So let me click on it and see what happens. So this is going to fetch all the feedback. This is going to fetch all the customers data, and you can see in the merge node, we are merging the fields on email so that I have 100 records, which is equivalent to the number of customers that I have in the Google Sheet. So we have the feedback data and customer data merged over here as an output to this merge node. So now if I go back to the canvas, you can see the final actions that are being taken is update customer feedback in the Airtable. Then we are sending a thank you email to all these 100 customers, and then we are filtering, and then there is this code node that is doing something, and then finally we are sending an alert. One thing to notice is that all these final nodes are grayed out. So if I click on it, you would see something called activate. If I click on activate, this is activated. If I click on deactivate, this is deactivated. In this lesson, I did not want to execute the entire workflow. Rather, I just wanted to show you the concept of edit output feature of a node. So I have deactivated all these nodes, so I'm not accidentally updating the customer data or sending those 100 emails to my email inbox, or even the support messages which are being sent on Slack message. I have disabled that as well, because we are here to focus upon the edit output feature. So what we need to do is, if you look at this filter node, it is saying that if the JSON.rating, so the rating that the customers have provided, if it is less than 3, then it is filtering those records and passing it further, so that our customer service team can get in touch with those customers and see what is the problem over there and seek more inputs from them. So if I execute it, you would see about 38 items. So 38 items have been filtered. If I go back over here, so now 38 items have been filtered. If I run this code, it is going to merge all those into one basically message or one summary of it. And then basically we are sending a one single message to our service team that has 38 users or user feedbacks which were less than 3. Now let's suppose you wanted to do some sort of manipulation on that data. I want to basically see if I can update the ratings of some of those records and then test out rest of the workflow. If that is your need, how are you going to do that? You're not going to go back to your sheets and update the data. What you can do is you can click on this merge node from where the data is originating from originally, and over here just aside this pin data icon, there is this edit icon as well. So if I click on this edit output icon, you can see that it has returned me the JSON object that is being outputted over here. And you already know about the data structure in which every node in n8n outputs data. So over here, you can see that I can edit any of this data item that is there. So for example, this one had a rating of 2. Let's update it to 4. And now let's go back and find out some more. Let's see, we have some more. This one has a rating of 1. Let's do it as 5. And then there is another one. This also has a rating of 1. So let's make it 4. Now let's just save this. So now this data is saved, and you can see that this data is automatically pinned to this node. So now if I go back over here, earlier we had 38 items returned as per the condition that was true. The rating is less than 3. If I execute it now, we have changed or modified the rating of 3 more records to be more than 3. So if I click on this, it should return us 35 items, and you can see 35 items have been returned. So this is the power of editing data, that you don't need to call that data again and again. It is going to pin the data that you have modified so that you can use that data for rest of the workflow for testing different kinds of scenarios. Editing outputs allow you to simulate any kind of scenario, helping you debug your workflows, optimize them, and improve the overall reliability of your workflows. And now let's jump to the final topic of this lesson, which is copying and reusing the data from previous executions. So you might end up in a situation where you might want to reuse the data that was being executed in some of the previous executions of your workflow. Maybe you want to debug a particular issue that is happening in your workflow, or you want to handle some errors gracefully. So instead of running that workflow again and generating all that data, what you can do is you can copy the data from previous execution, paste it in your workflow, and then execute your workflow to test out what happened wrong or handle some errors gracefully. And how do you do that? Let's get to our screen and see that in action. So again, I'm back to the cloud instance of my n8n workspace, and you can see this is the overview section of it. Currently, I'm under the personal project. Here you can see all the workflows which are there, the credentials which are there, and the execution. So I'm going to click on execution because we have to access a past execution. And at the top, you can see that there is this workflow 5 connecting different apps has been errored out. So let's open this. I'm going to click on it. it is going to open this execution that happened on this date and this time, and you can see that no email found error was generated over here. Now if I have to troubleshoot this kind of an error, what we can do is, if I go over here and you can see that this input data is there, so something might have gone wrong in this particular input data. That is why it generated an error over there. So if I copy this, now what we can do is we can go back. Now if I click on the editor, it is going to allow me to edit the workflow that was there. So now if I open up this webhook, because this is where the data was coming in the if node, right? So if I click on this and I go to this icon of editing data, we have already copied it. So now I'm going to just paste it over here and save it. And let's go back and execute our workflow first. So let's go and execute. So you can see that error has occurred over here. Now if we inspect this data, you can come and see that email was not mentioned. In fact, this is basically a graceful way of handling the error as well, because here we are checking for the email presence or not. If there is presence, then only we are executing this workflow. Otherwise, we are using this stop and error node. We're going to talk about what this is in the later lessons of this course. However, over here we are gracefully raising an error that no email was found, so no action was taken by the workflow. However, you now understand the concept of that you can go to the executions, copy any type of data that was there as an input to any node where the error occurred. So you need to copy the data just previous to the node where the error has occurred, and then come to the editor mode of it. That would give you the current version of the workflow that you are working upon. If there is any kind of pinned data already, you can unpin that data, paste the data that you have copied from the previous execution, and test or debug your workflow in order to fix the issue. So copying this past execution data, ensure that you are not wasting time in regenerating that data or running after the data what went wrong. You can exactly copy the data which was erroneous in nature and test it out right in the editor of n8n. So all these three concepts that I taught you in this lesson of the course, pinning the data, editing the output data, or copying the data from previous execution, is not only going to save you time from debugging issues or copy pasting data or executing webhooks again and again, rather it is also going to save money for you, especially when you are making those costly large language model LLM API calls, especially when you are building the AI automation workflow that we are going to soon start building in the section 6 of this course. Similar to this concept, in the next lesson I have dedicated the entire video on how you can generate mock data for your test workflows, again so that you don't need to call the external services. You might not have the access to that kind of data, or you want to generate more and more test use cases in order to fully make your workflows reliable and resilient. So stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next lesson where we are going to learn how to create mock data for n8n workflows.